Welcome to History Unraveled. Ever wonder how a community can just completely, I don't know, implode on itself?
Oh, yeah.
Like how fear can just completely warp reality and
Yeah.
injustice becomes, just the norm?
hmm
And it, it's really unsettling. We're diving into a historical event today that encapsulates all of this. The Salem witch trials of 1692.
Yeah, the Salem witch trials, 1692.
So in a single year in colonial Massachusetts, over 200 people were accused of witchcraft.
That's
Well, it
wild.
wasn't just quiet suspicion. It was just this massive wildfire.
Yeah, wildfire of
Yeah,
accusations.
and I'm so excited for this deep dive because we have so much source material.
Yeah, it's a lot.
And I know you love this topic. So
It's one of those topics that just grabs you
yeah,
when you learn about it.
so we have stuff on the back of the timeline of accusations and trials, the legal procedures that they used,
Yeah.
and the aftermath.
I mean, we have everything. It's all there.
Yeah. And so our mission today, learner, is to unpack all of this,
Mm.
to look at the underlying tensions, the shocking accusations, the flawed legal processes, and then the eventual reckoning that they had.
Yeah, and how this hysteria unfolded.
Yeah. So get ready for some surprising facts
Mhm.
and, like I said, just a clearer understanding of this whole hysteria.
Definitely. And I think one of the things to keep in mind right from the beginning is the broader context here.
Okay.
Witchcraft and witch trials might seem totally alien to us now, but back in the early modern period in Europe, this was a real thing, a deadly serious phenomenon.
Wow.
But here's the catch. By the mid-17th century, witch trials were actually on the decline in a lot of Europe, but they kind of clung on in these more remote areas,
But
places with super conservative religious beliefs, and we see that in the American colonies.
got it.
So Salem is like this weird, brief, but super intense outburst of this fear.
Yeah, like a resurgence of this fear almost.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's fascinating to see that it was actually declining in other places, but in this one area, it just exploded.
And it wasn't just some isolated thing either. There were books, publications that fed into this whole atmosphere.
Oh, really?
Take Joseph Glanville, for instance. Back in 1668, he wrote a book called Against Modern Sadducism, and basically it was all about how witches and the supernatural, they're totally real, no doubt about it.
Interesting.
And he took it super seriously. It wasn't just ghost stories for him. To him, if you doubted witches, you were basically denying God, the ultimate heresy.
So wasn't just a belief, it was foundational to their understanding of right and wrong, good and evil.
Exactly. It gave this intellectual justification for believing in witchcraft.
Wow. And then there's Cotton Mather,
Yeah.
huge figure in Boston, right?
Yeah, very influential.
In 1689, he published Memorable Providences. And this book became super important because it described these really disturbing things that supposedly happened to the Goodwin children in Boston.
It's a good one, Chill.
These kids were having these violent seizures. Their
Yep.
bodies were twisting in unnatural ways. And Mather explicitly said, this is witchcraft.
It was like he gave everyone this image of what demonic possession looked like.
Yeah, like a guide almost.
Right. And what's really interesting is that these symptoms, they almost became a template, like a way for people to interpret any weird behavior.
Yeah, like if somebody was acting strange, oh, it must be witchcraft.
Yeah, and you can see how this could have shaped what happened in Salem.
Definitely. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy almost.
In a way, yeah.
People are looking for something. And so when they see anything out of the ordinary, it confirms their suspicions.
Exactly.
But the idea of witchcraft accusations wasn't exactly brand new to New England.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
There are records of executions going all the way back to 1647 with Alce Young in Hartford, Connecticut.
Wow.
That was the start of the Connecticut witch trials, and those trials popped up on and off for decades. So the fear was already there, embedded in the culture.
Right. It wasn't a new concept.
And to understand this even better, we have to look at the society they built. New England was settled by people who'd broken away from the Church of England. They were hardcore about their religion.
Yeah, they were serious.
They wanted to create a society based on their own strict interpretation of the Bible.
Interesting. So this really permeated every aspect of their lives.
Absolutely. It was like the foundation of everything for them.
And the political climate before 1692? It wasn't exactly calm.
Oh, no, it was a mess. Their original charter, the one for the Massachusetts Bay Colony, was revoked in 1684.
So imagine the uncertainty.
Right. It was this huge legal limbo.
Then there's Governor Andros, appointed by King James II.
Oh, yeah, Andros was not popular at all.
And then, bam, the Glorious Revolution in England.
Andros was overthrown right here in Boston.
Wild.
It was a crazy time.
So basically, they were in a political vacuum for a while.
Yeah, for a few years, things were pretty shaky. Leaders from the old charter were running things, but their authority wasn't really clear-cut.
So you've got political uncertainty, and then you've got King William's War raging.
Oh.
The English colonists are fighting the Wabanaki people in Maine.
Supported by the French.
Yeah, so English settlements were being attacked, sometimes abandoned, and refugees were fleeing south to places like Essex County.
Where Salem was.
Yeah, so you can just imagine the fear and tension.
Absolutely. It was a very unstable environment.
And then there was that failed expedition against Quebec in 1690, led by William Phips.
Yeah, not a great moment for Phips.
No, but he becomes important later, doesn't he?
He does indeed.
It's like they're living in a pressure cooker, and all these events just keep ratcheting up the tension.
Exactly. It's like the perfect storm brewing.
Finally, in October 1691, a new charter for the province of Massachusetts Bay was granted.
Thanks in part to increased Mather.
And then the same William Phips, who had that disastrous Quebec expedition, gets appointed the new governor.
Talk about a comeback.
I know. And William Stoughton became his lieutenant governor.
They arrived in Boston in May 1692.
Right as things are getting really bad in Salem.
Like walking into a powder keg.
It really is incredible timing.
It is. And one of the first things they do is establish a special court,
Oh, really?
the Court of Oyer and Terminer, specifically to handle the growing number of witchcraft accusations.
Wow. So they recognized right away that this was serious.
Yeah, the situation was completely out of control.
Now let's talk about Salem itself,
Mm-hmm.
specifically Salem Village.
Present-day Danvers.
And it wasn't some peaceful place.
Oh, no, no, no. Salem Village had a reputation for being difficult.
Oh, really?
They were known for their disagreements and arguments.
Interesting.
And there was this tension, this animosity between Salem Village and Salem Town.
The rural versus the more established.
Yeah, exactly. And the historical records show these constant conflicts over just basic things.
Like what?
Property lines, grazing rights, who gets to control the church.
So it was a community divided.
Oh, yeah, deeply divided. No trust among neighbors, just constant suspicion.
And their religious life was no picnic either.
No, not at all. They'd voted to become independent from Salem Town religiously way back in 1672. They wanted their own minister, but it never seemed to work out.
What happened?
Well, the first few ministers, like James Bailey and George Burroughs, didn't last long.
Why not?
The villagers didn't pay them their salary.
Oh, that's not good.
No, and ironically, George Burroughs, he ends up at the center of the witch hysteria later on.
Oh, wow.
Executed.
That's chilling.
It really is. Then they hired D. Lawson, but he didn't stay long either.
So what was the problem?
It's hard to say for sure, but it seems like there was always some kind of conflict.
Yeah.
Some disagreement.
And then came Samuel Parris.
Oh, boy.
Yeah, their first ordained minister.
The Paris situation just shows how divided they were. The village was completely split over him.
Wow. So what happened?
They agreed to hire him in 1689, promising him a salary and use of the parsonage.
Okay.
But then some people wanted to give him the deed to the parsonage and more land, which was against their own agreement.
So more conflict.
Oh, yeah, more resentment, more division.
And Parris didn't help, did he?
No, he didn't. He was very focused on finding iniquitous behavior among his parishioners, making people confess even for minor things.
So he increased the tension.
Absolutely. He created this atmosphere of fear and judgment.
So we've got political instability, the threat of war, and a community already tearing itself apart. What could go wrong, right?
And then there's the religious context.
Yeah.
We've talked about the Puritans and their beliefs, their desire for this pure biblical society.
Right.
They hated anything that reminded them of the Church of England.
Popery.
Exactly. They saw it as a threat to their way of life.
And this is why they came to America, right?
To build their own society based on their own beliefs.
Yeah.
In the early days, political power was completely tied to the church.
Wow.
If you weren't a church member, you basically had no rights.
So it was a theocracy almost?
In many ways, yes.
But things were changing.
Yeah, things are starting to shift. After the English Civil War, fewer Puritans came to America.
Got it.
And a new merchant class was rising, people who weren't necessarily as devout.
So there's this new tension between the old guard and the new money.
Yeah, exactly. And the old guard felt like their vision was being threatened.
So the Puritans are feeling under siege from all sides.
In a way, yes.
And we can't forget about the role of gender in all of this.
Absolute grace.
The vast majority of those accused were women, like 78%.
It's a staggering number, and it's not a coincidence.
The Puritans believed women were inherently weaker, more susceptible to the devil.
Right. It was this deeply ingrained misogyny. But at the same time, they also believed women were equal to men in the eyes of God.
So women were both vital to the community
Hmm.
and somehow inherently flawed.
It was this really messed up contradiction, and it put incredible pressure on women to be perfect to resist temptation.
It's like they were damned if they did, damned if they didn't.
Exactly. And you have to wonder how many women internalize this belief.
Like they actually believed they were more susceptible to the devil.
It's possible some of the confessions might have been genuine in that sense.
Or maybe they confessed to save their lives.
That's certainly a possibility. Confessing meant a chance of survival.
Yeah, it's like a no-win situation.
It was. And the women who didn't fit the mold, they were the most vulnerable.
The unmarried women, the widows, the childless women.
They were seen as outside the protection of the community.
Yeah, like they were easy targets.
And then you have the constant warnings about witchcraft.
Yeah, from the pulpit, from books.
People were being told over and over again that the devil was real, that he was working in the world, that witches were among them.
It's like they were being primed to see witchcraft everywhere.
Exactly. They were looking for it. And when they found it, it confirmed everything they'd been told.
So you've got political instability, social division, deep-seated religious anxieties, and a constant barrage of warnings about witchcraft. The stage is set.
The fuse is lit.
Yeah. Now let's get into the actual events, the timeline of accusations and trials.
Okay, so it all begins in Salem Village, February 1692.
Reverend Samuel Parris's daughter, Betty,
Just 9 years old.
starts having these really strange fits.
John Hale, the minister from Beverly, he said it was beyond any natural illness.
Wow, so what were these fits like?
Well, we have eyewitness accounts. Reverend Deodat Lawson, he was there, and he described these girls screaming uncontrollably, throwing furniture around.
Making these strange noises, crawling on the floor.
Yeah, they were contorting their bodies in these unnatural positions.
They even said they were being pinched and pricked with invisible pins.
And the doctor, he couldn't find anything wrong with them physically.
Wow, so there's no medical explanation?
No, and soon other young women in the village started showing similar symptoms.
So it's spreading.
Yeah, it's like a contagion of hysteria.
And it wasn't just in their homes either.
No, it happened right in the middle of church services.
Reverend Lawson was preaching, and these girls started having these fits right there in the meeting house.
Imagine the chaos.
Yeah, the fear.
People must have been terrified.
And then come the accusations.
The first 3 women accused are Sarah Goods, Sarah Osborne, and Tituber.
Accused by Betty Parris, Abigail Williams, Ann Putnam Jr., and Elizabeth Hubbard.
4 young women who set off this whole chain of events.
Yeah, and Ann Putnam Jr., her involvement is especially interesting.
She was part of the Putnam family.
And the Putnams had this huge feud with the Porter family.
It was a bitter rivalry that had divided Salem Village for years.
So some historians think these early accusations were fueled by that feud.
It's very likely they were using the witchcraft scare to settle old scores.
And if you look at the first 3 women accused, they're all outsiders in a way.
Sarah Good was poor. She didn't really fit in with the Puritan ideal.
She was accused of being mean to children.
Sarah Osborne rarely went to church.
And she remarried, which raised eyebrows.
Yeah, she was seen as selfish, putting her own interests first.
And then there's Tituba.
An enslaved woman from South America.
She was accused of telling stories about magic and fortune-telling.
She was different. She was an outsider, and in this climate of fear, she was an easy target.
So these 3 women are brought before the magistrates on March 1st, 1692.
They're interrogated for days and then thrown in jail.
The first victims of this mass hysteria.
But it didn't stop there. The accusations just kept coming.
In March, Martha Corey is accused.
And she was a skeptic.
Really?
She'd publicly questioned the girl's claims.
Wow.
And Dorothy Good, Sarah Good's 4-year-old daughter is accused.
A 4-year-old.
And then the most shocking accusation of all, Rebecca Nurse.
A respected member of the church in Salem town.
These accusations sent shockwaves through the community.
Yeah, if these women could be accused, then anyone could.
It was a terrifying thought.
And the examinations were just horrifying.
They stripped the women, searched for so-called devil's marks.
Any mole, any birthmark, anything unusual.
Oh, it was pure superstition.
Yeah, logic and reason had gone out the window.
In April, things escalated even further.
Sarah Cloyce, Rebecca Nurse's sister, is arrested.
And Elizabeth Proctor.
And her husband, John Proctor, tries to defend them.
And he gets arrested too.
It's like anyone who dared to question the accusations was immediately suspect.
Yeah, you couldn't even defend your own family without risking your life.
And then more arrests.
Giles Corey,
Abigail Hobbs.
Bridget Bishop, Mary Warren, Deliverance Hobbs.
And some of them started confessing.
Abigail Hobbs, Mary Warren Deliverance Hobbs all confessed.
And they started naming names.
It was like a chain reaction.
Yeah, fear, feeding on fear.
And the accusations just kept multiplying.
Sarah Wilds, William Hobbs, Nehemiah Abbott Jr., Mary Easty.
Edward and Sarah Bishop Mary English.
It was a whirlwind.
By the end of April, the jails were overflowing.
Reverend George Burroughs, Lydia Dustin, Susanna Martin Dorcas, Horace Sarah Moray, Philip English, all arrested.
Some people were released and then rearrested later.
Based on new accusations?
It was chaos.
Then on May 10th, Sarah Osborne dies in jail.
One of the first to be accused.
And on May 27th, Governor Phipps finally steps in.
He orders the establishment of the Court of Oyer and Terminer.
Specifically to deal with the witchcraft cases.
And warrants are issued for 36 more people.
By the end of May, 62 people are in custody.
And even Cotton Mather starts having doubts.
Really?
He writes a letter to Judge John Richards.
Warning against relying too much on spectral evidence.
The testimony of the afflicted saying they see the spirits of the accused tormenting them.
So even Mather is starting to see how problematic this is.
Yeah, he's not completely convinced anymore.
And then the Court of Oyer and Terminer convenes on June 2nd, 1692, in Salem town.
William Stoughton is the chief magistrate, Thomas Newton the prosecutor.
And the first case they hear is Bridget Bishop.
The grand jury endorses all the indictments against her.
And the evidence against her is so flimsy.
They accused her of wearing black clothing.
Of having a torn coat.
Of behaving immorally in the past.
It's ridiculous.
It was a complete farce.
And she's convicted that same day.
And executed by hanging on Juneteenth.
The first person to be executed in the Salem witch trials.
Then the grand jury indicts Rebecca Nurse and John Willard.
But their trials are delayed.
For some reason.
Maybe they realized they needed more evidence?
Or maybe they were just hesitant to condemn such respected members of the community.
Either way, it's a brief pause in this relentless march towards executions.
And the court decides to ask for advice from the ministers.
They want guidance on how to proceed.
So they adjourn for 20 days.
And on June 15th, they receive the minister's response.
A letter written mostly by Cotton Mather.
So what do the ministers say?
It's a complicated document. On the one hand, they urge caution.
They warn against relying too heavily on spectral evidence.
They say that the devil could appear in the shape of an innocent person.
So even they acknowledge that spectral evidence can be misleading.
Exactly. But then they turn around and recommend speedy and vigorous prosecution.
So they're basically saying proceed with caution, but also don't hesitate to condemn people.
It's very contradictory.
They're trying to have it both ways.
And years later, when Cotton Mather published this letter, he left out the parts about caution.
Interesting.
It seems like he was trying to downplay his earlier doubts.
So the minister's advice was ultimately pretty ambiguous.
Yeah, it didn't really provide the clear guidance the court was looking for.
And then Nathaniel Saltonstall resigns from the court.
He was one of the judges.
And he was deeply troubled by the reliance on spectral evidence.
He was one of the few people in authority who had the courage to speak out.
But his resignation didn't stop the trials.
No, the accusations and arrests continued.
And on June 16th, Roger Toothaker dies in prison.
The conditions in the jails were terrible.
And the grand jury keeps issuing indictments.
Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin Elizabeth, and John Proctor.
Martha Carrier, Sarah Wilds, Dorcas Hoare.
All indicted.
And then the trials begin again.
Sarah Good, Elizabeth Howe, Susanna Martin Water, Sarah Wilds, and Rebecca Nurse are all convicted.
And executed on July 19th.
5 more lives lost.
And Rebecca Nurse was considered a very pious woman.
Her execution really shook the community.
It showed that anyone could be a target.
Doing the most devout.
Then in July, there's a new development.
In Andover.
The constable invites the afflicted girls from Salem to come examine his wife.
It's like they've become this traveling witch-hunting squad.
And this leads to even more accusations and confessions.
Anne Foster Mary Lacey Sr. and Mary Lacey Jr. all confessed to witchcraft.
And Anthony Checkley is appointed the new prosecutor.
Replacing Thomas Newton.
Maybe this signals a change in approach.
We'll see.
In August, the grand jury indicts George Burroughs, Mary Easty, Martha Corey, and George Jacob Sr.
And all of them are convicted.
Along with John Willard and John and Elizabeth Proctor.
It's a relentless tide of accusations, convictions, and executions.
And the execution of George Burroughs on August 19th is especially disturbing.
He maintains his innocence right up to the end.
And he recites the Lord's Prayer perfectly on the gallows.
Something that was believed a witch couldn't do.
And people start to have doubts.
They're moved by his words.
But then Cotton Mather steps in,
He reminds the crowd that Burroughs had been defrocked as a minister.
and he convinces them that Burroughs is guilty.
The executions proceed.
It's a chilling example of how powerful Mather was.
He could sway the crowd with just a few words.
And Burroughs' body is treated with such disrespect.
Dragged to a shallow grave, stripped of his clothing.
It's dehumanizing.
They're not even treating him like a human being anymore.
In September, the accusations continue,
18 more people are indicted.
including William Proctor, who'd been cleared earlier.
And Giles Corey refuses to enter a plea.
He knows that if he's found guilty, his property will be confiscated.
So he's subjected to peine forte.
They crush him to death with stones.
It's barbaric.
A horrific death.
And on September 19th, 4 people plead guilty and 11 are found guilty.
Including Giles Corey, even though he's already dead.
They convicted him posthumously.
It's absurd.
Then on September 20th, Cotton Mather writes to the court clerk.
Asking for detailed accounts of the evidence.
He wants to write about the trials,
And on September 22nd, 8 more people are executed.
bringing the total to 19.
But there are a few reprieves.
Dorcas Hoare is given more time to confess.
Abigail Faulkner Sr. is pregnant, so her execution is delayed.
And Mary Bradbury escapes.
She evades capture.
Around this time, Cotton Mather finishes his book, Wonders of the Invisible World.
His defense of the trials.
But the tide is starting to turn.
In early October, Governor Phipps returns from Maine.
And he's increasingly troubled by the use of spectral evidence.
So he halts the court proceedings.
He orders a stop to the trials.
Finally,
It's the beginning of the end.
on October 29th, Judge Samuel Sewell records the dismissal of the Court of Oyer and Terminer.
And around this same time, Governor Phipps's own wife is accused of witchcraft.
That must have been a wake-up call for him.
It's like the hysteria is finally hitting too close to home.
But the legal process isn't over yet.
No. In January 1693, a new court convenes,
The Superior Court of Judicature.
still headed by William Stoughton.
But there's a crucial difference.
Spectral evidence is no longer allowed.
It's a huge change,
It shows that they're starting to realize the flaws in their previous methods.
and the impact is immediate.
The first 5 people tried by the new court are all acquitted.
And grand juries are convened to review the cases of everyone still in jail.
Many of the charges are dismissed,
But 16 people are still indicted and tried.
and 3 of them are found guilty.
Elizabeth Johnson Jr.,
Sarah Wardwell and Mary Post.
but Governor Phipps pardons them,
He spares their lives.
a sign that the times are changing.
The court moves to Charlestown
5 more people are tried,
and acquitted.
but they're still held in jail until they can pay their fees,
And one of them, Lydia Dustin, dies in jail.
even though she's been acquitted.
It's a tragic reminder of the lasting impact of these accusations.
In April, Captain John Alden is cleared,
And in May, the court dismisses all the remaining charges.
except for 5 people who are then acquitted.
It's over.
The Salem witch trials are finally over.
But the scars remain.
So let's take a step back and look at the legal procedures they used.
It usually started with an accusation.
Someone would go to the magistrates and claim that someone else had harmed them with witchcraft.
And if the magistrates believed the accusation, they'd arrest the accused.
And then came the examinations,
These intense interrogations.
where they pressured people to confess,
And if they got a confession,
or even if they just thought the accusations were credible enough.
they'd send the accused to a higher court for trial.
But in 1692, they had to wait for the Court of Oyer and Terminer to be established.
And once it was established, things moved very quickly.
The grand jury would decide whether to indict.
And if they did indict, the trial would often happen the same day.
So there was very little time for the accused to prepare a defense.
It was a system designed to secure convictions, not to ensure justice.
And the executions took place on 4 main dates.
June 10th, July 19th, August 19th, and September 22nd.
19 people were hanged,
14 women and 5 men.
and there were others who were convicted but not executed.
Elizabeth Proctor, Abigail Faulkner, Mary Bradbury, Anne Foster, Mary Lacey Sr., Dorcas Hoare, and Abigail Hobbs.
They were either pregnant or escaped or died in prison,
And then there's Giles Corey.
who refused to enter a plea.
Him was crushed to death.
A truly horrific end.
And even after they were convicted, the victims were still mistreated
Rebecca Nurse and Martha Corey were excommunicated.
and denied proper burial.
Their bodies were thrown into unmarked graves.
It's a final act of cruelty.
And then there's the whole issue of spectral evidence.
The testimony of the afflicted claiming to see the spirits of the accused.
This was a major part of the trials.
And there was debate about whether the devil could use someone's shape without their permission.
The court decided that he couldn't.
So if you saw someone's spirit harming you, it meant they were a witch.
But this is so subjective.
How can you prove or disprove something like that?
It's impossible.
And it led to countless innocent people being condemned.
Cotton Mather tried to defend the use of spectral evidence in his book.
He claimed it was only one piece of the puzzle.
But his critics pointed out that people who confessed were often spared a trial.
So it's clear that spectral evidence carried a lot of weight.
And eventually, even Increase Mather and other ministers urged the court to stop using it.
They said it wasn't reliable.
And this pressure played a role in the eventual end of the trials.
But it's also important to note that the Salem magistrates were following a precedent from England,
The Bury St. Edmunds trial in 1662.
where spectral evidence had been allowed.
So they weren't completely inventing this.
But that doesn't make it right.
And they used other bizarre methods too,
Like the witch cake,
made with rye meal and urine.
to try to identify the witch.
And then there are the stories about Tituba and fortune-telling.
The details are murky, but it's become part of the Salem legend.
And Tituba's confession was a major turning point
She confessed to witchcraft,
and implicated others.
and her status as an outsider made her a very believable villain.
They used the touch test too.
The belief that an afflicted person would stop having fits if they touched the witch who was afflicting them,
It's just another example of their superstition,
and they relied on confessions
which were often coerced,
and the testimony of other accusers.
and they looked for physical evidence of witchcraft,
Poppets, books, ointments.
anything that could be interpreted as suspicious.
It was a system designed to find guilt, not innocence.
And even after the trials ended, the community was still deeply divided.
Survivors and families were trying to clear the names of their loved ones.
And they were seeking compensation,
And some people were speaking out against the injustice.
like Thomas More.
He criticized the trials in his book.
And he was imprisoned for it.
It shows that the fear was still present.
But there were also signs of remorse,
In 1696, the General Court declared a day of fasting.
to acknowledge the tragedy of the trials.
And on that day, Samuel Sewall publicly apologized for his role as a judge.
And 11 other jurors asked for forgiveness.
It was a step towards healing.